Okay, so the culture experience I was actually really excited about, and Dr. Strong allowed me to talk to y'all about my experience in Kazakhstan. I lived there for about 2 months, and while I'd love to tell you all about it, I decided to just choose one experience in order to present this to y'all. Before we get started, you guys need to know a little bit about Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was originally its own state. They were a nomadic people, and they were conquered by the Soviet Union. They gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, but to understand their culture today, you need to understand the president's relationship with Russia. So they have actually elected the same president ever since 1991 because he's actually friends with the Russian President Putin. I actually asked one of them what they're going to do when this guy dies because he's really old and they have no idea. Also, you need to know about them is that they're very traditional. And their traditions actually hold very good merit to them. It's very important to them. They actually still introduce themselves, even though the Soviet Union took place, they still introduce themselves by the 3 tribes that they have. And any time they say hello, they actually introduce themselves as part of a tribe. Also, just to let you all know, most of my information that I get from Kazakhstan or about Kazakhstan or the culture there, I've actually had, comes from conversations I've had with people there, both who are expats or foreigners, as well as people who are actually from Kazakhstan. Though for the purposes of this paper, they've asked for me to keep their identities a secret, as if, because some of their work could be affected by it. So the summary of the event. I decided to talk about my opportunity to visit some orphanages, and I specifically chose the one where I got to visit the disabled who are under 18. I actually got to visit all of the different orphanages, and the way that Kazakhstan sets up their orphanages is that you have a separation of under 18 and over 18. So I actually met women who were 80 years old who lived in an orphanage, I guess you would call it. And then they split that even further into those who have mental or physical disabilities and those who do not. So the experience I'm going to talk to you all about today is those who are disabled under the age of 18. Now, Mrs. M, who is a missionary woman who visits orphanages, she actually worked for about 3 years before gaining entrance into an orphanage and has been going there for about 4 years now. For about 4 years she's been visiting these orphanages, and she visits all of them weekly. To give you kind of an understanding, in Kazakhstan, you are not really an individual, you're known as a family unit. So whatever family you belong to, that is how you are known, that is how you get your value. So children who are born out of wedlock or disabled children who are considered like another mouth to feed are not considered valued because they are not actually attached to a family unit. This gives them some disadvantages. One is in the disabled orphanage that I was going to, they do not receive any education because they are not considered by the government able to contribute to the society. Those who are not disabled are given some sort of education and are allowed that opportunity, but not all. Also, this really sat with me before we went into this orphanage. Mrs. M sort of gave me this whole speech, and she told me, this is not America, this is Kazakhstan. You do not have rights. These children do not have rights that we would consider human rights. So if you see anything or that you don't agree with, please don't do anything. Because again, it had taken her 3 years to gain entrance, and at any moment that opportunity could be taken away from her. I was like, yeah, sure, not understanding at all what was going to be happening, but we went. The day we went, there was actually a government personnel who was visiting the orphanage, and we almost were not given access to the orphanage because they did not want us to know that we were there. But we were let in, and I was only able to see the children who were outside of the building. We could not go inside of the building that day because of the government official. The children outside of the building were all children who had some sort of mental disability. The children with physical disabilities were generally kept indoors because it's hard to get them to come outside, physically to move them. They are looked over by nannies, who generally have about 20 to 25 children under their care. Nannies are allowed to use any force means necessary as long as the child is alive, essentially. I observed one nanny. She was on the phone the entire time, had no idea what she was talking about because she was speaking in Russian. And this girl wanted to come and speak with me, and the nanny would not let her get out from under the gazebo, and kept dragging the child back under the gazebo until finally I went and sat with the child for a little while. Over there, physical abuse towards children is not considered a bad thing. Children are taught to pull down their pants and defecate on the ground as long as they are not in an area where other people are, and that's about as much as they get, education-wise. However, despite this, the children's demeanor was very happy, very joyous. I mean, I walked in and I had over 50 kids running at me to give me hugs and kisses the whole time I was there. One girl barely even let go of my hand. I did meet the arts and crafts teacher, and I would say that other than Mrs. M, who is an expat, she was from a different country, she was the one who really did care for these children. A lot of the nannies and faculty officials and all that don't really see these children, they just see it as a job. But the arts and crafts teacher really did love these children. She was in charge of producing arts and crafts made by children that would be sold to those in the community. The whole process was that they were to be sold, and then the money was to go back to the orphanage for the children. But what would actually happen is that the faculty officials would take the money and give the arts and craft teacher a small percentage back, which was not good. So she did not like that, but that's kind of how it was because she didn't want to take their one little bit of happiness away. So about different cultures, what I learned versus the American culture, because that's my culture, versus the Kazakh culture. The Kazakh culture is all about family units, whereas the American culture is about individualism. So your value is assigned to your family in Kazakhstan, whereas in America, our government kind of values us as individuals. Also in Kazakhstan, if you receive help from the government, it's kind of more of a taboo thing than in American culture. You usually go to your family first. You go to, because aunts, uncles, they're all considered part of the family unit. It's a very broad and wide family unit. The American culture, it's not as taboo. I mean, yes, we do still have stereotypes, but not nearly as much as the people in Kazakhstan do. As for children, in Kazakh culture, as long as you are attached to a family unit, they are valued. The divorce rate and child abuse is more taboo than it is even in American culture. However, if you're not attached to a family unit, those statistics and stuff drastically go down. You are more likely to be physically abused. You're more than likely to not receive an education. For children in America, they are valued individually, remember, by the government. So we are given free education through high school. Children can speak up against physical abuse and all those kinds of things, even if they are not attached to a family unit. So that's kind of the big differences I saw between those two. Okay, so for my future practice, I kind of took this away as a way of saying that my way is not always the best way for someone else. What I wanted to do when I saw the nanny hit a child was go up, hit the nanny, and say, "How do you like that?" But that wasn't going to help because it was going to take Mrs. M away from that situation. She would not have been allowed back in. And she did speak about how when she first started going versus when I went, it had actually improved a lot. So even though there were things that I drastically disagreed with, what was happening was getting better. So my immediate reaction, my immediate response would not have helped these children at all. Also, the client has a right to self-determination. So while these children had no voice and really they do have advocates and they are getting better, it's hard to imagine taking away something that was beneficial for them. At the moment, Mrs. M, the arts teacher, was the best thing that was going to happen because you can't sit there and just go in and completely change an entire culture in a short amount of time, the 2 months that I was there. So while I hated it, and it was hard for me not to speak up against things, I had to, because I knew that in the end the children would be given at least something. They would be getting some sort of service. So that's what I kind of got as a way of my future practice is, if it's best, it might not be what I think is best for the client, but it's what they think is best for them.